Hey, everybody, welcome. Hello, I'm Natalie, and this is Life After a Cult, the channel where we expose cult nonsense. We laugh at the absurdity and hopefully unbrainwash ourselves in the process. Today, I have a guest on. Jon Atack is joining us again. It's been a hot minute since we sat down with Jon, and you guys know he is a former Scientologist. He's also the author of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, amongst other books, which I'm going to pull up his channel after I pull him up. And you guys got to make sure that you are following him. If you have any questions, if you could put question in front so I can see it easier as we're chatting, I'll try to get to as many of those as we can, because we got a great topic for you today. Culty as all get out, but we're going to really take a look at how cults recruit, brainwash, trap people in their web of control. If you think you never would join a cult, you definitely want to watch this video, because what we talk about might surprise you, might terrify you, but it's data, so it should help and actually make you feel better. So without further ado here, I will welcome Mr. Jon Atack here. Hello, Jon.
Hi, Natalie. Good to see you.
Hold on. Oh, there we go. We got to do the up close. The audience demands it.
Quite right, too. So they should.
So they should. Let me pull up your channel here. Y'all can find Jon Atack on Jon Atack Family and Friends there, and check him out. He does fairly regular content as well, though he was just telling me he's doing a video a week. And I'm like, Jon, you got to stop slacking.
Yeah.
You're so busy writing books and
yeah, it's true.
Oh, Vernon just bought your book.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and he's from a former JW, which I've just been fascinated learning about. I've been talking with another creator, Jake. His channel is Alt Worldly, and we're going to get together again next week where we talk about, the JWs versus Scientology and the commonalities with cults.
Is that like kind of a football match? The JWs versus Scientology. Let's see who wins.
Exactly. Who is more culty?
Yeah. I think we definitely win that one, Natalie.
I think so. There's a reason why Scientology is so difficult to recover from.
Yeah, well, let me address that before we go any further.
Yeah.
In the 80s, I used to come over and do work with the Cult Awareness Network, particularly in California. And a number of people said to me, we have 2,000 groups that we list as cults, but the only one that we cannot get our heads around is Scientology.
Wow.
And I've heard that from many cult experts, that Scientology is just like on overdrive because it just kind of completely saturates its members. So Britain has over 100,000 JWs. For me, I've had spent a lot of time with ex-JWs in the last 10 years. And I was in St. Petersburg before things went nasty in Ukraine. So 2014. And I was amazed at how many Jehovah's Witnesses there were there. And this guy was helping me, I was talking at a conference, and he was 35 years old. And he told me that his parents didn't talk to him. Now, I'm used to the idea of kids not talking to their parents. I've got 4 kids. But a parent not talking to their children, no, that's no, that's just absolutely wrong. And after that, I met lots of people who've been through, and every now and then, Frances Peters, I've done a few videos with her. She's a really good friend. She's a counselor who spent the first, I think, 44 years of her life in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and has an incredible story. But it's wild stuff.
It's a lot. What do you think, the title of this video, if you think you would never join a cult, watch this. Can you kind of jump in just kind of with what your thoughts are on that? Because you have been, talking about cult and especially Scientology since the 80s, right?
Beginning of the world, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I since 1983, cracky. And it started out that, I left Scientology. I'd not been on staff. I'm the only person I've met, and I've met more than 1,000 people who are in Scientology over the years. I'm the only person I've met who was not humiliated and abused in Scientology. Everybody else I've talked to, but I was never on the staff. I was treated as a celebrity because I'm an artist, writer, musician, and so I always got really, nice treatment. And come out, and then you
Which is the
find,
difference. That's the thing in Scientology is if you have some celebrity status or a lot of money, most of the time you're treated differently than the average members. But that's
for reasons unknown.
Mhm. Well, I think we know
Yeah,
why.
I think we probably do. So the first 7 years after I left, it was all about how do I talk to people who are involved with this and help them to see that they're in a trap,
Mhm.
which I called the total freedom trap. And in fact, I've even got a copy of it here. This little booklet that I wrote 30 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And it starts out. I'm going to put my spectacles on now so that I look all clever and
Gotta look
like, look
all
at me.
author like. This is
Okay.
good because Magnus is asking, John, after A Piece of Blue Sky, which of your books do you recommend next?
Opening Our Minds. There's a copy of it there behind me. Let me give you. I'll get to that. Let me give you these beautiful quotations from Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, the Commodore, as I like to think of him. Scientology is a religious philosophy in its highest meaning as it brings man to total freedom. Ron Hubbard said that in 1960. Then, 4 years earlier, in 1956, he said, an endless freedom from is a perfect trap, a fear of all things. Fixed on too many barriers, man yearns to be free, but launched into total freedom, he is purposeless and miserable. So Scientology leads to being purposeless and miserable.
Wow, that's so typical of what it sounds like L. Ron Hubbard's playbook was, which is to figure out something that, may be useful and then use it in the worst possible way possible to control people.
Yeah, and to paralyze people with contradiction, which we talked about before, that the double bind method that runs throughout Scientology, where you say one thing, then say the opposite, and the person can't think anymore. They're not sure what they're meant to think, and so they come to you as their guru and boss to tell them what to do. Now, the reason that my work, so Blue Sky was published initially in 1990.
Yeah.
And there is a pirate copy out there, which we've talked about before, which is
Mhm.
what it was when it was filled out with all of the stuff that we'd had to take out of it because of an American court case. I called it "Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky." So that's the one that I get money from. That's the one, therefore, that people ought to buy. But there's a reputable American publisher. It is actually pirating this book. So don't buy it from them. Buy it from me.
That's right. Make
This
sure the book you buy says, "Let's
Yeah,
sell
and
people of blue sky."
it does, and it's got, this is what the cover looks like.
So on Amazon, when you go to Amazon, that's what you should be looking for.
That's what you should be looking for, and all of these clouds cost different amounts of money. So this was a biography of Ron Hubbard showing how often he'd contradicted his own stories about himself. He wasn't a nuclear physicist, he wasn't a war hero, he wasn't an explorer, and he didn't study with gurus in the East. Apart from that, he occasionally told the truth, not very often. So, but the book was written to very much to decondition people who've been involved with Scientology, to pull apart the implanting, as I like to think of it, that Ron Hubbard put in. So if you haven't read it and you've ever been involved with Scientology, I definitely recommend it. I'd rather you didn't get one of the online copies, because I'd never given permission for anybody to put it up there. And it is not only the old version, the abridged version, which is missing 100 passages exclusive to this one, but it also has missing chapters because whoever put it up there didn't make a great job of it. And people just keep copying it. And I keep trying to get, but I absolutely, if you want to get over the things you don't know about what Scientology did to you,
Mhm.
then this is a very, very good starting point. If if your interest is in understanding other groups and indeed how these methods are used throughout our society, they're used in advertising, they're used by politicians all the time, spin and all of that, then opening our minds, it was about that. And that took me a lot longer. I first, I mean, the latest edition was 2019. There you go, through Amazon. That's one of the places. Absolutely. It it what I thought is, thank you, Janet. What I wanted to show the commonality, because before we came on, you were sort of saying, well, we have this word cult, and people tend to go, no, I was in Scientology, or I was in, and when I was in Scientology, you talk to me about the Krishnas or the Moonies. I say, well, they're cults. That's fine. They're cults. The word cult actually just means a group that is devoted to a particular leader or teaching. It's not pejorative in and of itself. It's become pejorative. But some cults are dangerous, and they're the ones we're concerned with. But to show that the way these things work is in no way exclusive. So, for example, we have the expression love bombing, which comes from the Moonies, though they deny it. They also deny they're called the Moonies, and they say they're called the Unification Church, or the Collegiate Association for Research into Principle, or any one of several hundred other names, in fact, with the Moonies. But you have there a group that is nominally Christian, comes from South Korea. And what happened with Sun Myung Moon, the founder, was that he was in one of the North Korean brainwashing camps. He spent 3 years in one of those camps where they used the Chinese brainwashing program. And I'm going to stick with the word brainwashing because that's what the Chinese call it. It's called Sinao, washing of the brain. So, sociologists get very upset about the use of this word. If we're talking about the Chinese program, they have the right to name it. They call it that. Also called thought reform. Sun Myung Moon, 3 years in one of these camps, learns the techniques, brings them out, creates the Moonies, which is a very powerful organization with hundreds of thousands of members and gun factories in a town near you. They supported Richard Nixon. They were really big on getting Nixon back into power because he was a great bloke, and all those nasty things that people said about him. I don't know. It's terrible. Really. But they gave us this technique, which has come to, the word, the language, it's gone into the language. Many people probably don't know, but love bombing. So the idea is you meet somebody, and all of us know that we're not vulnerable to stupid ideas. We all of us know, it's called the third person hypothesis. Other people are affected by advertising. I'm not. Other people would fall for this. I'd never fall for anything. I had a friend who was telling me that he would never be stupid enough to join a cult. So I pointed out to him, I said, you smoke cigarettes, don't you? He went, yes. It's like, so who got you to do that? Why are you doing that? If you're stupid enough to do that. He also happened to be an alcoholic. And so you're going, you don't really need a cult. You're actually doing it to yourself. You're destroying your own life. You don't need to join a group that will take all your money away. You spend it on cigarettes and booze. So, and this idea of invulnerability, the third person hypothesis, makes you much more vulnerable.
Interesting. I got to wrap my head around that. So the idea that you think you are not vulnerable to a cult is what makes you vulnerable to a cult.
Yeah, more than other people. I many years ago, 40 years ago, I interviewed a member of Scientology's Watchdog Committee, which are the 14 people who worked directly for Hubbard and ran everything. And this young man, we had clandestine meetings, because he was a little bit scared of what they might do to him if anybody found out. And we met on 2 nights, and he gave me fascinating information about what was really happening in Scientology. Hubbard had actually, he'd left in 81, and Hubbard had sent this dispatch down saying, it's too late, I can't save the world. You're the only people I can save. You 14 are the only people who'll survive. 1981, right? And this guy who was 19.
Survive what? Survive
what?
Oh,
the end of the world, World War III. That you remember there was this thing, I think 1978, Hubbard published this thing saying, I want Scientologists to survive World War III. I want everyone to, I don't want there to be a World War III. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about
Let's
it.
start there.
So Hubbard had this kind of paranoid thing going on because among his special abilities was seeing into the future, though not very well, it would appear. And this young man who had grown up in Scientology, who had got to the very top, as high as you could get, and he left as soon as that message came down because he went, but if the world's going to end, I don't want to live without my sister and my parents. I'm going back to my family. So he did. And I interviewed him at the end of the second interview as we were parting company. He said, you know, the great thing is, Jon, we'll never be tricked again. And I looked at him and went, no. The great thing is, I know I'm gullible. And that means I'm alert. That means I'm watching. That means if you're trying to sell me anything, whether it's a product or a religion or a therapy, you know, anything you're trying to sell me, I clock, you're trying to sell me something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, love bombing is the first way in. And that's why, oh, wow, you're looking great tonight, Natalie. Your hair
Thank
is
you, Jon.
fantastic. You know, it's just,
Thank you.
and your makeup is just, and you're so smart. Now,
Take my money. Take my money.
in this case, I'm speaking the truth, but that's the way in, that our vanity is such that as soon as somebody encourages us and is positive towards us, then there should be a warning sign that says, I don't know you.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question, Jon? Do you think that's become that we're so susceptible to love bombing? Because sometimes I've thought about this and thought, is it because we don't express, you know, our, whether it's appreciation or just show love to each other enough, that we haven't really normalized it? You think about, well, yeah, I love my children. I love my spouse. I love my family. I love my friends. But when we're out in the world, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was in Hawaii, I went to church with my youngest sister, to her church. It was on this phenomenal property. And it was fantastic. God, they had amazing Kona coffee. It was killer. And
Kona coffee is the best coffee in the world.
Hands down.
Forget Blue Mountain. Kona is the stuff. Kona Fancy Pure. Incredible.
100% Kona coffee, though, not just, you know, fake Kona coffee.
Yeah.
But when we were there, people were so nice and welcoming when people were coming there. And I thought to myself, what if we greeted people that way all the time? Genuinely, you know, you're in the grocery, hey, and even to strangers. Do you think that has anything to do why we're more susceptible to love bombing? Or is it just because it's humans? You know, we of course just like that attention and that love and that affinity.
I think you're absolutely right. And it changes from one culture to another. People love going to Thailand because the culture there, Sinuk, is this culture of happiness and pleasure and being kind to people. And so, you know, people love going to Thailand. I've not been there, but if anybody would like to donate the money for me to go there, I'd be happy to do that for you to see if I'm telling the truth.
Purely for research purposes?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would take no personal pleasure from it.
Well, it's probably like Hawaii too, because in Hawaii, the culture is very much aloha. I mean, I have live aloha tattooed on my arm to help me remember, hey, especially in traffic, because when I'm driving, I can see it right here.
Sometimes it's necessary. I was talking to my friend Rachel Bernstein a couple of years back. She has a great podcast called Indoctrination. And she's counseled hundreds and hundreds of people who've come out of authoritarian sects, cults, what have you. So, and you know, she's really quite something. She's one of the few people I would recommend as a counselor because she really understands what's going on. But I was talking with her, and she was saying that she'd been giving a talk once, and she'd asked people to say, write down a time when they were discouraged at school, and write down a time when they were encouraged at school. And barely anyone had ever been encouraged in school. And you're going, so you spent 13 years in this establishment and you can't remember being encouraged. I think I mean, I can remember as a child, I was about 8 or 9 when I got hold of this thing of, you know, tell people what you like about them. There's not enough of it. I don't know why I got to that, but so that became part of my life. And so even when I got to Scientology at age 19, I was used in the course room if they needed to demonstrate a floating needle. Throughout the 9 years I was in, you need a floating needle. Oh, John, pick up the cans. There you go. That's what it looks like. And I was like, well, surely everybody's like this. And I started to realize that as quite a young man, that some people look at you very suspiciously when you're nice to them because they go,
Oh,
you
you
love,
ain't got to tell me.
yeah, you love bombing me. This is cupboard love or Hubbard love, as we also think of it, where somebody is just they're not really being nice. It's fake. And I think are so right that we live in a culture that is not friendly enough, that is not supportive and encouraging enough. And so when somebody reaches out and they're friendly to us, apparently friendly to us, we end up buying a secondhand car that doesn't work, or a religion that doesn't work, or what have you. And this goes on with the Moonies. They'll take you away for 3 days to one of their little camps, and they'll love bomb you solidly for 3 days. So you're the most wonderful person in the world, which will lead you into a honeymoon relationship with whichever group it is. I mean, when I got into Scientology, it's exactly what happened to me. That I wasn't recruited. I read Science of Survival by Hubbard, was in a miserable part of my life. My girlfriend had run off with my friends, gone to New Zealand, and I was feeling really sorry for myself. And so I went there, and there were these really nice people. They'd all, there were 6 of them. They'd just graduated from university in various different subjects, arts subjects, humanities. And they were just really nice. And they were really nice. That's the bit where it gets difficult. They really did think that they were sharing something fantastic with me, something life transforming. So it was very weird when about 4 years later, the woman who'd been running the centre in Birmingham, who was just the most ebullient, effusive, wonderful person. I saw her about 4 years later, and she was like, there was just all the cheer had drained away from her. And it was only after we left Scientology, about 5 years beyond that, that she explained to me that she'd done OT3, operating Thetan level 3, where she'd found out that she was meant to be packed with little beings that had been shoved in there 75 million years ago. This is all true. Scientologists actually believe this, as South Park says. And she couldn't find any of these things.
Your American voice. I love that. Your South Park accent. I know I'm totally interrupting, but I can kind of do a Cartman. Let me see if I can do it. Wait, what was it you said? Scientology. What's the line? Scientology.
Scientologists actually believe this.
Scientologists actually believe this.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. We could get you a role. If we could just get you and Nancy Cartwright together, we could have a show, the voice of Bart Simpson. So she couldn't find any of these little beings. And it just really messed her up. That she wasn't mad enough to find any of this nonsense.
But so it just took the joy out of her, who she was before, with being effusive and having lots of that affinity as she moved up in Scientology. And I've seen this.
Oh yeah.
That joy and that genuine wanting to show appreciation and a liking, it goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. The woman who actually owned the mission, Stephanie Ryburn, she wasn't there when I went along, or they would have recruited me on staff because they'd been told, don't recruit anybody. So I'd been around for a few months by the time she got back, and I didn't want to join staff anymore. I wanted to go to St. Hill and train up and, become brilliant and all that stuff, which never happened. But she looked at me as if the cat had dragged me in, as if I had been scraped off the bottom of a shoe. And she would not smile at me, and she would not address me by name. And she was an operating Thetan. So I'm going, oh no, she's reading my mind. Oh no. What's she find? No, stop thinking that, John. Stop it. Don't think that. She's, all that sort of nonsense. And I didn't see her very often, but over the next 7 years, when I did see her, she never smiled at me. She never addressed me by name. And then I got onto the OT5, and so she was on it at the same time. And she came out of the waiting room one day with this huge grin on her face. And she said, John, she actually called me by name, John, isn't it wonderful that Ron's come up with something that clears up the mess that OT3 makes? And she'd done it under Hubbard on the ship. So there's no question about whether she'd got it right. And so for 15 years, 14 years, she'd been carrying this stuff around and having to pretend, not very well, frankly, that this was working. So yeah, it's messed up an awful lot of people.
Yeah, and their ability to have that like Northern Girl says it well here. The world has gradually become so skeptical that when someone is nice, we're suspicious. And Mock says a lot of societies mistake seriousness and stoicism for maturity, and we need to have simple joys in life.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. And what's the point of being alive if you're not going to take a little bit of pleasure out of it? And you know, I differentiate things. The happiness and pleasure to me are different things. Pleasure is like having a bit of chocolate or something. It's something that, you know, is satisfying. Happiness for me comes solely from having somebody else say thank you for having done something for somebody else. And that is, you know, chocolate, I've got to look forward to the next bit. And I like the 85%, the good stuff.
The dark chocolate? Me too. God, I love dark chocolate.
Absolutely. It's got to be the stuff. But looking back, you know, every now and then somebody will thank me. I had a letter which I often talk about where a woman wrote to me and she said, "You won't remember me." And she's right. I don't. I've no idea. I spent an afternoon with you 15 years ago. My life was in turmoil because of Scientology. And I'd like to say that since that day, I am happily married, I have children, and I have a career. And it's been 15 years. And you go, yeah, now I'm happy. Now I feel good about, you know, what it is how I've wasted my life. You know?
In Scientology.
Well, you see, out of Scientology, you see, I could have been a banker and I could have made a load of money. Huh. And instead
you were an artist.
Yeah, an artist. And you know, spending time unpicking this horrible trap that Hubbard created, which, you know, I stopped doing this. I did it for 12 years. I was harassed on a daily basis. All of that's really slowed down. Arnie Lerma, bless him, the crazy Arnie Lerma, said of me, before the internet and safety and numbers, there was Jon Atack. And it was like that. And so the harassment was every day and it was awful. They went on for 4 years after I stopped. I got 16 years solid of litigation and private detectives and my house being broken into and everybody I know being called up and, you know, doing a noisy investigation on me. We're investigating John for criminal activities. We found some wonderful things. You know, it's like, oh, great. Thank you so much. Scurrilous little pamphlets being reported to the cops, all of this stuff. It went on for 16 years. And so I decided I didn't want to do it anymore, oddly enough. And then in 2013, so I'd been away for 17 years, not bothered with it, not reading anything about it, not studying a lot of other things that are dangerous. I've written about terrorism, for example, published by the Oxford University Press on the subject of terrorism. Imagine that. Book called Lone Act of Terrorism, to which I contributed part of a chapter, you know. It's like, but I did lots of other things. And then I talked with an ex-Scientologist and she'd been on TV in Australia. So her story is known. She was abused from the age of 6 by a Scientologist stepfather. When she was 11, she went to the cops and the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
Scientology's friend.
persuaded her to withdraw her complaint.
Oh.
She was sent back into the household, where she spent another 5 years being beaten by this guy. Thankfully, she was too old for him to be interested in her otherwise. And she then had 5 years in the Sea Organization from the age of 16, because that was her escape route from this life. And Steve Kinane, a brilliant ABC Australia journalist, wrote a wonderful book called Fair Game, A History of Scientology in Australia. Absolutely wonderful book, brilliantly researched and hilarious in places, as any story of Scientology has to be, because it is bizarre. And he came, and this is a journalist, and these are people I've dealt with, a couple of hundred or more journalists over the years, and I don't have a high opinion of them as a species, because often, as the first Daily Mail journalist to interview me, he said, John, stop talking. What I want is a victim and a picture. And that was like, oh, okay, fine. And most of the journalists I've dealt with, that's what they want, a victim and a picture. I want to be involved in something that helps people, not simply. And so Steve Kinane was one of those journalists who actually has a heart and cares. And so he said to me, look, there's this woman and this is what's happened to her. Will you talk to her? And I'm like, Steve, I'm not doing this stuff anymore. I'm talking to you because you're writing a book. I do that, and I do cases that involve children, and that's it. I don't want to be harassed anymore. I've had enough. And he pleaded with me, and so I was like, oh, okay. So I talked with her, and I tell you, she was 6 when this happened. She was 11 when this happened. She was 16, 5 years in the SEAL. She'll be about 25. She was 37 years old. And in our conversation, it became, she asked me, is it true? And this is a woman, she'd gone and got a university degree afterwards. She was a smart woman. She said to me, is it true that, as Ron Hubbard says, because she'd grown up in Scientology, is it true that reality is an agreement? And I went, well, if you're the hypnotist, yes. Otherwise, no, it's out there, whether you like it or not. It's real. It's not because you, as L. Ron Hubbard says, are chanting space particle position, space particle position. I've never chanted space. Oh, I just did it now. But apart from that, and the next week when we spoke, she was really pleased because she'd used scented fabric conditioner, laundry conditioner in her washing. And we both knew what that meant, but we hadn't talked about L. Ron Hubbard's phobia of scents and the hygiene hat in the Sea Organization. So this is how it works. Once somebody can challenge the guru, whoever that is, once they find that there's one thing that they've said, reality is agreement in this case, that is wrong, they become able to keep going and keep, whenever any thought pops into their head, go, is that in fact true? And the power of the guru, which is internal, it's like what Freud called the superego, the little policeman that's been inserted in your head to make you conform. But those two conversations convinced me that possibly the majority of people who've been in Scientology don't actually escape the way of thinking, because you're in it. It's how you think. And so getting somebody to step aside from it became my mission. And I wrote about 70 pieces for Tony Ortega's Underground Bunker. I had a couple of years, we did a conference in Toronto called Getting Clear of Scientology, which it's nearly 10 years since we did it. And I don't have control over it, unfortunately. I didn't get paid for doing it either. But it was great. And so we are gradually leaking the videos into our Patreon, because I want everybody to see it, because it kind of undoes, we had 27 presenters. We had somebody or other who from 1963 up until his death, so for 20 years, we had somebody who'd been with Hubbard or working directly to him, from Hannah Whitfield, who I think was 63. She went to St. Hill first, and on through. And the incredible stories that came out, like the standing order number 1 line that you can always write to Ron, which was a standard of Scientology. You always write letters to Ron Hubbard. And
they had a box in every org. There was a box and you could put your letter in there to Ron.
Yeah, it does actually. It isn't untruthful. It does say you can always write to Ron. It doesn't say anything about him seeing the letters. And Hannah was like, we'd got boxes of these things and we didn't know what to do with them. We were aboard the ship. And she said, and one night it had a great sense of liberation when because she was the head of Division 1. She was the first super ethics officer, which is communication. So it was up to her to work out what to do with these things. She said, we threw them overboard.
Oh my goodness. After all people sent in those letters and stuff. I wanted to ask you too, Jon, because we're in talking about, how people think that they wouldn't be susceptible to a cult. Can you talk about some of the ways that some subtle signs that you might be being influenced without realizing it, whether that's Scientology or just in, another group, another cult? Because I think that's kind of the thing, is people not recognizing when they're actually being influenced, because it can be subtle.
And it's very deliberate. As you know, with Scientology, you have the dissemination drill,
That's true.
which all Scientologists are taught. And the first thing, you have to make contact with the person. Then you have to find their reality.
Exactly.
So you find
Contact,
out,
handle, salvage, bring to understanding.
Bring to understanding. The understanding is, give us all your money. Or you could become a slave. There are choices. Money,
there are
slavery.
options.
Yeah. So you finding the reality is, you get the person to talk about something they're interested in. So if you find yourself in a situation where somebody is getting you to do all the talking, a bit like you with me, actually. If you find
then I'm using my hypnotic eyes to hypnotize you into the cult of Alohatology.
The Church of Chemicalology, as found in Rex the Runt, and I do recommend that video. Find that online. Rex the Runt, the Church of Chemicalology. Wallace and Gromit came out of the same studios, but it is most definitely about Scientology, and it's about 100-year-old sausage who runs a cult. It's all true. It's all true. Johnny Savaloy stole my voice. But so somebody who is, if you start feeling warm and engaged by somebody, then they're picking you up.
But at the same time, though, it can be a genuine, you know what I'm saying? Like, right, we were talking earlier, we don't express like a liking. We're not friendly enough to each other in general. And then when we are, we find that suspicious. So in sitting here trying to think through, okay, every time somebody's nice to me, I don't want to be suspicious that they're about to try and make me a sister wife or join Amway. It's sometimes it's genuine. But how do we know when we talk about those signs of influence, like where we're actually being influenced? Because it's not always love bombing.
No, I think it's being alert to where the communication is going, because fairly soon, I mean, pickup artists and pimps have a set of techniques, and as I say, with opening our minds, I looked at gangs, terrorists, 100 different cults, all sorts of, going right back through history. I mean, I started at the Eleusinian mysteries in about 1800 BC and worked my way up. That there are certain things in common. There are certain things that will happen. And in a normal, friendly communication, somebody won't push into your space. Now, this is something pickup artists do. They will try and touch you physically. So some guy in a club who's kind of touching your hair.
Oh, hell no. These days, I haven't been in a club in 35 years, so I'm not sure.
Exactly. It put you off when that guy touched your hair, right?
Oh, I'd be immediately backing off. And
exactly.
Knee to the groin involved in that.
Yeah, which is another form of contact, human contact, knee to the groin. Kick him in the nuts. And when somebody is pushing into your space, when they're coming too close, that means be careful. If somebody offers you something, this is the reciprocity principle, that if we're given something, we'll feel we have to give something in return. It used to be with the Krishnas that they'd be out on the streets with their great haircuts, and they'd be giving you spiritual sky joss sticks. I had an American friend who said they didn't know what a joss stick was. It's an incense stick. If anybody out, surely everybody knows what a
Oh,
joss stick is. Come on,
I didn't know that. I know incense stick.
it's amazing, isn't it? The
British
vast
thing.
cultural divide. It's an Indian thing. It's the
Oh.
Indian name for them. Good God. It's like curry. That's in fact an English word that people think is an Indian word, but it's very confusing language. Was it Churchill said the US and Britain, two nations divided by a common language? But they would hand you their spiritual sky joss sticks, which are among the best joss sticks you can get. The Aurobindo cult are also very good, though of course anything with smoke in is bad for you. Sorry, it'll have tiny little particles it's putting out there. Oh dear. So you get your joss sticks, and then you're supposed to give them some money. And a friend of mine was approached on the street, and they gave him the joss sticks, and he smiled. So they gave him a free record of them singing Hare Krishna or something, and he did that. And they gave him something else, and then he walked off. And the guy said, "Hey, aren't you going to give me anything?" He said, "No, thanks." But reciprocity is a natural process. Pickup artists will use a piece of really cheap jewelry. They'll give you a little necklace or something. So
Now,
again,
when you say pickup artist, John, are you talking about someone trying to recruit for trafficking, or are you talking like the dating scene?
the dating scene. Tom Cruise in the brilliant film Magnolia, where he shows you exactly how it's done, and there's cynical approach that's there. It's weird. He has played. It's like Nancy Cartwright. When you listen to Bart Simpson, you're going, "Yes, these are true things about cults. Aren't you listening to what you're saying?"
Yeah.
Or Isaac Hayes, the incredible, brilliant Isaac Hayes, who ends his career as the chef in South Park and leaves because of he's realized they've made an episode about Scientology.
Yeah.
But again, children's, this is one of the significant things that they're saying something without knowing. Or Elizabeth Moss in the Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, the thought that this is a hardcore Scientologist who is teaching us about cults. There's something very wrong here. So yeah, pickup artists like the Tom Cruise is teaching incels how to pick women up.
In the movie Magnolia.
Yeah, which is just an absolutely brilliant movie, and he's great in it. But Philip Seymour Hoffman's even greater, and Jason Robards is quite amazing in it too. It shows you that heartless way of seeking to control somebody. There are other simple things. When people smile, when it's not genuine, it doesn't happen here. It only happens here.
How can you even smile without your eyes moving? Wait.
Well, they move a bit, but you'll see.
I guess if I smiled like that, it would not be genuine. If I don't move my eyes, it looks like this.
That's great. I'd pick you up anytime. With people who are actually friendly, as they get old, and I'm very old, there are wrinkles here.
Oh yeah, I got them.
Called laugh lines. And you are more likely to be dealing with someone genuine if they've got laugh lines.
Well, that makes me feel good because I've got some massive laugh lines.
Well, yeah, and it's as it should be, it's as it should be. The old wine's the better wine, I think, definitely. Until it goes off, obviously, but or if it's corked,
Good till it's not.
And another part of it is with any kind of deal, if somebody is urging you to buy now, to do something now, to make any kind of commitment now, back off. That you're probably dealing with somebody who's done this before. Don't sign contracts without taking them away. Always look up the group or the person online to see if you can find anything about them, and talk to your friends who are not involved. Talk to people who are not involved, because usually recruitment is something that happens very quickly. One of the, as I say, I've written about terrorism, and when you look at suicide bombing, suicide bombers, the bombers are usually young, often very young.
Mm-hmm.
17 or 18 is usual. And they will have been recruited no more than 3 days before they commit the act.
Whoa, I did not know that.
Mm.
Wow. So these aren't necessarily people who have been going down that road and training for it for a long time. They were recruited 3 days prior. So you make contact,
Mm.
recruit these people into this cult, and then get them to do this heinous act.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a. I mean, the great expert is Ariel Marari. Most of the people who write about terrorism are like me. They've not really interviewed terrorists. They're just looking from the outside. I, of course, am interested in the mechanisms. Marari and Kafta Ahmedova and Anne Speckhart are the only people I know of who actually went and interviewed. Kapta was a friend of mine, and she interviewed a lot of people in Chechnya who'd been involved with the Black Widows over a couple of years.
Mm.
And they came to very different conclusions to the experts who were sat on the sidelines. And Marari came to this thing that you have a 3-person team with a suicide bombing. You have an engineer, that's the person who makes the bomb. You have a recruiter, and the engineer and the recruiter very often have a university degree. They're very often highly educated. Then they find somebody, and the rules in Palestine was they must be 17 or over, which is quite touching. So you get to be that old. They will, of course, have been radicalized by the environment in which they live. Nobody needs to tell them that it's, there's something bad going on here. And
Mhm.
the resentment they feel is about the situation they find themselves in. The recruiter then will prime them, and within 3 days, they will very likely be dead. I tell the story of a suicide bomber in Opening Our Minds to show how the steps, step by step, how the process is done,
Mhm.
and how you can actually take somebody and reverse almost everything they believe in a matter of hours, because there are certain types of people who are more readily and more susceptible. And this is difficult. Creative people, imaginative people are a lot more susceptible than prosaic, unimaginative people. So artists tend to be, because we have an imagination. And
Mhm.
the whole process here, we get sidestepped by this word hypnotism.
Mhm.
Hypnotism. Look into my eyes, look into my eyes. Oh, God,
Mhm.
that's good. You're really good at this.
Would
And
be a good hypnotist, I feel like.
yeah, all you need to do is learn how to count backwards. Oh, that's Dianetics, isn't it?
Mhm.
Uh, hmm. um, it's one. There are words that are called purr words that make us feel happy, like democracy, for example, and there are words that are snarl words, like fascism, yeah,
Mhm.
appeasement, and a lot of words have this emotional loading. So hypnotism is a snarl word. It makes us all withdraw. So let's move that word over and let's use the word imagination instead. They mean the same thing. That the manipulation of the imagination, the guiding of the imagination is what hypnotism is. So visualization, for example, is a form of hypnotism. It's a way of changing your state of mind. And if you put, that's one factor. The other factor is fervor. I've done I spent a lot of time. One of my best friends is this guy Yuval Laor. A few videos with him on my channel, and he did his PhD studying belief and how awe and fervor act upon human beings. So you have this thing that if somebody is fervent, if
And what does that look like when you say they're fervent?
they're excitable. They're people who get really interested in things really easily, and they're passionate about it, and they want to do it now, and they want to, they're what you might call hypomanic. They are just on the edge of being manic, but they're people who have profound convictions, and those people are easy to flip. They're easy. It's easy to grab that fervor and shove it in a new direction. It's
Mm.
also true that heightened emotional states, in Scientology, this is a weird one. When you look at what's going on. The end phenomena of Scientology process are, tell us what the end phenomena usually are, Natalie. What would you normally be looking for at the end of a Scientology process? You would want
very good indicators.
very good
And
indicators.
if you're on an e-meter, it would be a floating needle.
Yeah, exactly so. Very good indicators. Now, human beings outside of Scientology have other expressions for very good indicators. Hubbard could drain the poetry out of anything. Euphoria, exhilaration, ecstasy. We've got so many words for this. This state is very easy to induce in people, and it's considered a sign of hypnotic suggestibility. That when people are euphoric, it's much easier to give them an idea and get them to grab hold of it. So if you read descriptions of textbook hypnotism, and I am not trained in hypnotism and I never will be, but when I realized I'd had 9 years being trained in it in Scientology, I figured I wanted to know what it was so that I wouldn't be doing it to people.
Yeah.
And I found out it is a normal part of our communication. There are all sorts of things we do which bring about states. And one of the first surprises for me was finding that when people go into hypnosis, which is the proper technical term for what people call a trance state or an altered state, I don't think it's altered. I think it's just one of the states that we have. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that we need to be in control of. And the problem is when somebody on the outside controls it. But one of the things that happens is a sense of euphoria. Hubbard in the I was trying to remember this the other day, but it's the Book of E-meter Essentials or the Introduction to the E-meter, it's one of the 3 little books about the E-meter. It has 2 pages of pre-clear originations, things that somebody is likely to say to you during a session. And these are things like, the colors in the room are brighter.
I have a pain in my stomach.
Yeah. I have an awful feeling of fear. I can't stop
There's
thinking
a
about that.
band around my head.
Yeah. Moo gum my pam.
Oh, forgot about that one. And for those who don't know,
which is Chinese food, by the way. I looked it up in the end.
I didn't know that. There were lists in Scientology that you use when you were doing drills on the e-meter of, like John just said, things that a person might say in an auditing session. So when you're practicing, you're using all of these lists.
Now, coming back to those years later, it was in fact to look up Moo Gum Gai Pam because I'd used it in something. I wanted to know how you spelled it because, of course, and I opened the list and I looked at these lists and went, oh no, half of these things are things that people say as they enter hypnotic trance. The colors in the room are brighter. I feel larger. I feel smaller. You get alterations in perception. And this is typical as you go into the states that we think of as hypnosis.
Mark says also many people forget about the neurolinguistic programming part of hypnosis and how common it is.
Yeah, and the NLP, when I left Scientology in '83, 3 of my friends went and trained and did the master's program in NLP. My very good friend Steve Hassan, he was trained by Bandler and Grinder, who are the founders of neurolinguistic programming, and came away and said, they've ripped off Ericksonian hypnotism and applied it in a different way. And what you're looking at there is a systematic attempt to deconstruct human reactions. And there are some clever tricks that they can perform, but it very rapidly degenerated into a set of cults. It never became a scientific subject. So, they did things like firewalking, that like you could firewalk if you'd done NLP. And then some skeptic came along and said, well, you can firewalk anyway. You don't need any practice, just walk over it because it won't burn you. The reason it's not burning you is not because you've psyched yourself into a super state. It's because it won't burn you as long as you walk quickly enough.
Yeah.
So always some downer, isn't there? Throwing cold water over the fire and putting it out so you can walk over it.
I see how that would create a situation where too, like those are, I think, again, those influences that you don't necessarily notice because something is new or it is exciting. But if I'm also following correctly, it doesn't mean every single time somebody's trying to get you into a cult, but you realize pretty quick, because like what you were saying, once they find out how to get you into a bit more of that maybe euphoric state, or with the love bombing, they find out, like in Scientology, what your ruin is, as we called it. What is it that's messing up and ruining your life? And then comes the pitch and the sell of, this can help you do that. This will help you get through. And I know that it's not just Scientology where that happens. It's pretty much every cult.
Yeah,
Or
find out what the person's problem is, find out what's distressing them the most. And I can remember first reading the dissemination drill and going, this is incredibly manipulative. I'm not going to do it. And I never did. I was
wow.
fairly good at recruiting, but there was no way I was going to get somebody to talk about what was screwing their life up and then push them down. That was the bit that bothered me, the idea that you really push them into what's distressing them, and and you've tried everything and nothing's worked and all of
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And go,
Yeah.
oh. Then, of course, you have the tone scale drilling where you're pulling them down further deliberately. And I refused to do that when I was doing tone scale drilling. I'm not going to bring anybody down. That's evil. Don't
And
mind
you're
bringing
doing
people up.
it to manipulate them.
Mm,
That's where the cult control comes in, because when you're so upset and overwhelmed, it's like you can't think. You
mm,
can't think clearly and make decisions, and then it's like, "You don't need to think. Here, you just need to do this. You just need to do this course. You just need to attend this
mm,
lecture." Whatever the cult is, Scientology or something else, they get you into that state. So it starts off on this high of when you're first contacted and the love bombing, and then goes into as they learn and find out more about you. And that's probably the telltale of whether you're being recruited into a cult or not, is the way the conversation goes. Is this
mm,
person trying to rub your face in it? And you're right, because in Scientology, part of that dissemination drill, which is a series of steps that Scientologists are trained in doing, you contact the person, you handle any resistance to Scientology. Contact handle salvage, which is you find out what their ruin is, you rub their face in it. And I agree with you on that. That was a part that was very uncomfortable, because it seemed cruel to do it. You have to ruin them. Like we were trained to ruin people and then show them how Scientology will help. And we thought, that's what you did. Growing up in Scientology, that's like all I would see when new people would come in. So that would
mm,
definitely be, I could see how even in other cults, or maybe it's like an MLM, or it's an online cult and community where it's love bombing, that versus genuine affection, because at the same time we're trying to encourage people to be nicer to each other and be
mm.
friendly.
Yeah,
But you're not
and
trying to control them.
yeah, and if somebody's bringing you down, if somebody's distressing and upsetting you, then you know, walk on. This like,
Yeah.
unless you're feeling like becoming a psychiatric nurse or something, in which case, go ahead, help yourself. Um, but in relationship, take your time, be gradual. There is no rush. Um, so another part of what will happen after that, and I talked with, I was fascinated when after I left, because people could talk about their experience, and you realize that in Scientology, although the first level now the communication release, you can talk freely to anyone on any subject. That's
Yeah.
what you will gain. And you
Yeah.
go, but you can't talk about your case, your problems. You can't talk about Scientology because that's verbal technology. You can't
Mhm.
talk to anybody who's been declared suppressive. But apart from that, what have the Romans ever done for us? Apart from that, you can talk to anyone freely with these restrictions, anyone who
Yeah.
isn't suppressed. And so your communication is being closed down from the start. So this thing of you've got somebody interested, and the question that I would ask, there are a couple of questions I'd ask people. One was, did they solve the problem that they came into Scientology to solve? And the answer was usually no. And the second was, what was it that convinced you? And I asked more than 100 people this question over the year after I left. What was it that convinced you that Scientology worked? And that one was fascinating. There were generally, it was one of two things. They, for most people, it was doing training routines. When Steve Hassan, who, as I say, is an expert hypnotist, first
Mhm.
saw the training routines demonstrated, he said, "This is the most overt use of hypnotism I have ever seen in a cult." And this is a guy who's an expert on hundreds of cults. So you are immediately inducing a state. And this is I would call it a peak experience. Janja Lalich in her model calls it the transcendence, a transcendent experience. Yuval Law in his model calls it an awe experience,
Mhm.
an experience of wow. Now, here's the thing. If you sit and stare at something, what is called confronting in Scientology, it's not staring, I'm confronting. If you confront things, or if you meditate, as other people call it, so if you fix your eyes on something, your visual perception, what will happen is that you'll start to see movement, you'll start to see colors, your
Mhm.
perception will, you'll feel a little bit trippy, you'll feel a little bit dizzy if you have a normal brain. If nothing at all happens, then you need to see a neurologist because normally what happens is what's called the Ganzfeld effect. And this is that it's like you're having the brain is going, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. Tune up, tune up, tune up, get the sensitivity higher, and you start getting feedback. You start getting, and this process is called filling in by neurologists. It's easy to demonstrate. If you get a white noise screen, on a TV where everything's kind of flickering about, and you put an inch, where's my hand gone? You put an inch up here somewhere on the screen, you put a little inch on the screen of another pattern, and you look at it, within a minute, you'll stop seeing the inch because your brain has regularized what it's looking at. We have a blind spot in front of each of our eyes because of the connection to the optic nerve. We can't see that we can't see it, but you can show people there is a blind spot.
Is that kind of like how we can't see our nose? We don't. They say that we should be, like if you put
Yeah,
your finger here, you can see your finger,
mm,
but you can't see your nose. I mean, you could
yeah,
look like that maybe, but if you put your finger here, you can see it,
yeah.
but you can't.
It,
Our brains are actually conditioned to not see our nose.
Yeah, and you can take a pencil and move it, and you can show people that the blind spot in each of their eyes, but we fill in. Um, a very easy way of doing this, and you can do this at home. This is one of the things it's safe to do at home, unlike impersonating Superman. Don't try this at home, children. If you get a playing card, the back of a playing card that's blue, red, green, what have you, pattern, get
Mhm,
somebody to sit and look into the eyes of somebody ahead of them, just like
mhm.
training routine 0, to make sure that they don't move their eyes. And then the third person, brings the playing card round the side. And what you'll find is that it actually has to come in quite close before you can see the color, because we don't have color vision. We fill in. So
We fill in that we're making an assumption to a degree of what's there because we can't actually see it because it's a blind spot.
it's automatic that we will believe that we are seeing all of the room we're in, but in fact, some part of it at the peripheral vision is
Mhm,
actually filled in from the rest. This
mhm.
works in all sorts of ways that become very fascinating. That um, I'll never be clever enough to read Immanuel Kant. That's all there is to it. I never will be. I can't make head nor tail of it. But he apparently said we live in the real world, but we each of us live in our own interpretation of it.
I believe that.
Yeah, and
That makes a lot of sense. If we could even just acknowledge that or recognize that, because I think a lot of the problem comes from trying to obsessively convince somebody else that what they're seeing is not true and what you're seeing is true. And it's just an argument that in a lot of situations is never going to go anywhere because of what you just said. We
mm,
each perceive the world around us differently. So who am I to tell you you didn't see what you saw when you
yeah,
believe that that's what you saw? Maybe I didn't see that. I don't perceive it that way. We can have the same experience. We can watch the same movie. We can read the same book. We can watch the same YouTube video and have different takeaways from that.
absolutely. And
Mhm,
we each of us live within our interpretation of the world. So, and which is very different, thankfully, from one person to the next. In some cases, it's a response to trauma. I remember many years ago, a friend of mine coming around, and I'd got a Joni Mitchell album on, and he said, "Take it off." It's like, all right, take it off. That's fine. I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, I had a bad trip once, and there was Joni Mitchell on the stage. I said, "Was it this album?" And he's like, "No, but it's Joni Mitchell." It's like, so people develop strange reactions. I certainly do to the world around us. If we go back to the Ganzfeld effect, if you put somebody in a completely dark room, they will, within a few minutes, unless they have an abnormal brain and need to see a neurologist, within a few minutes in a completely dark room, you will get the sensation that something's moving. You'll also start to hear noises. Now, this can be a dark, silent room. And again, this is filling in. This is the brain accommodating things. And this means that our perception is a little bit faulty. And it means that people can tinker with it. And the usual conjurer's trick is that you do something over here so that you can pick their pocket, that take somebody's attention. And it is incredible how focused our attention is. It's why pickpockets are able to do what they can do, because you distract the person's attention. Well, a cult group is distracting your attention, but it's distracting it in a big way so that you're being taken away from that. Now, as you keep staring, and people who practice mindfulness will have had this experience. I learned mine in a Zen monastery when I was 18, which sounds very exotic, but it was actually 3 days in the north of England and it was freezing. But nonetheless, I learned Zazen meditation from Zen monks, and for a year I practiced that. Then I got into Scientology. So when I came to Scientology and was told sit and stare at somebody, confront somebody, I was very used to what normally happened. And some of the hallucinations can be quite weird. People change, they turn bright red or what have you. Strange things happen in the human mind. But after a little while of fixed perception, you'll start to feel euphoric. And you'll have very good indicators. And it's an automatic process. This is the awe that my friend Yuval Laor talks about. So once you've got somebody, you've love bombed them, you've got them to come in, you get them to do something that will, give them a peak experience, make them feel high. And then there's this automatic process that happens in us that because you made me feel happy by doing that, where happiness comes from. You know how to make people happy. Now, all you need is one technique.
Oh, so in other words, that's how the training routines in Scientology are then a key tool in creating that, because then you think that, that caused that. But if we were to do that outside of Scientology, we would have the same effect. But then there's Scientology or whatever cult you end up is trying to recruit you. It's like, now, I feel happy. I feel better because of this.
I feel high.
Yeah.
I feel high. But cocaine is a lot cheaper and a lot less dangerous than Scientology. And I am not an advocate of cocaine either. And once you've got somebody to have that experience, you can latch onto it. You can then there'll be this idea. And if you look at another group, the Rajneeshis, they do a technique where they go over-breathing, hyperventilation. And what will happen is you'll start to feel high, you'll start to feel dizzy, because in fact your blood is getting too much oxygen in it. It's not good for you doing this, but you'll feel high. It was a method that was used by a man called Stanislaus Grof, who was researching LSD in Czechoslovakia, and then it was made illegal. And he created this technique instead to get people high. There are lots of ways of doing this. I wrote a chapter for a book about Eastern religions and spirituality. And all of the other chapters are by eminent professors saying how great their religion is. And Steve Hassan and I wrote this chapter saying, well, over-breathing, staring at things, drumming, dancing, anything repetitive will induce these states. You can do it with a group of people. My friend, where's it gone? I've got it here. My friend John Hunter has just published this book, Manufacturing Mania. And this is about large group awareness trainings like EST, Landmark Forum, LifeSpring, Tony Robbins, where you get a whole group of people doing something together. And what John got a PhD studying this. He has bipolar disorder. So he's had some pretty extreme experiences. I think he's only 3 times had manic experiences in the last 25 years. But they are really extreme. You know, you get way too high, way too happy, and start doing things that are crazy. You know, you give away all your money, take all your clothes off and run down the street. Let other people eat all your dark chocolate, you know, really serious things. And he's learned how to deal with this in himself. He's understood what bipolar is, the 4 different forms of bipolar. There are videos I've done with him on my channel about this, which is absolutely fascinating, you know, how this thing affects people. I saw a video where one of Kanye West, the man who used to be Kanye West, somebody had come up through the slam poetry circuit with him, and she said, you know, she'd been diagnosed now with bipolar. And she said, I realized that he's got this bipolar and how. But of course, when you feel high, you're not going to go and see a doctor. You know, you feel great, you know.
Yeah.
And the level where you're still rational is called hypomania, below mania. And John was sent along by his boss at work to a large group awareness training. And he looked at the list of transformations that you're going to achieve. And he said, these are all symptoms of hypomania. And then he's done this incredible analysis of their technique. And fundamentally, what is happening is for about 3 days, you get stressed out. You know, you're abused as a group, fundamentally humiliated, put down, confessing things, made to into being nothing, pretty much like being in the C organization. And that will stack up all of your dopamine. Or of those of us who are not as that keen on brain chemistry being the determinant of all things, your anticipation will be halted and you will build up all this stuff. Then on the last day, you release it and people go, wow. And they sign up for the next course, oddly enough, and they go home, they divorce their spouse, they tell their boss to F off, they ruin their lives because they're in this euphoric state with very good indicators. Just after I got in Scientology, this guy came into the mission and he was covered in bandages and he was grinning his head off. I'm like, this is a strange, you know, covered in bandages. I said, what did you do? He said, I walked through a plate glass window, but I was exterior.
Outside of his body.
Yeah. Or depersonalized, as psychiatrists call it. The belief that you're outside your body. I mean, that was the one that I interviewed. Anybody I asked, anybody who'd come out of Scientology, were you ever exterior? And people would say yes. And then you say, were you ever exterior with perception? Were you ever exterior and could actually see stuff? And people would go, no. Here's a story for you. On the flagship Apollo in 1970-71, there was a furious row between Ron Hubbard and his wife, Mary Sue, which could be heard all around, that she was screaming at him. She did occasionally. And she was screaming at him, you're a charlatan, you're a fraud. Okay?
Oh.
And Hubbard said, well, what is it I have to do to prove to you that Scientology works? And Mary Sue, who'd been with him by this time for 20 years, said, I've never been exterior. So Hubbard said, right. And he called up Otto Rose, and I interviewed Otto, which is why I know this. And he said, Otto, run all of the exteriorization processes on Mary Sue until she goes exterior. And I think Otto said he found 90 of these processes. It's all been thrown away over the years because they don't work. And at the end of a few weeks, Mary Sue just begged him. She said, just no more, please, no more. And it's an experience you can hallucinate. There was a book called Beyond the Body, by a woman called Susan Blackmore. And she was the professor of parapsychology at Bristol University. And her career started when she got stoned as a student one night and floated out over the rooftops. And so her whole career was to prove out of the body experiences. So she dug and she dug and she dug and she dug into hundreds of these things. And she found out that what people describe when they are exterior is not real, that they'll get all sorts of details wrong. The color of the roof tiles will be wrong. And in the end, she burned her collection of material, having written this book, and said, it's, sorry, it'd be nice, but as yet,
Yeah.
there's not a single verified out-of-the-body experience. It's the aim of Scientology. It's what you're meant to be doing, getting out of your head, getting out of your mind. And it's possible. You will be out of your mind by the time you finish Scientology, but not in a good way.
Not in the good way that you want to. What would you say when it comes to, if people are watching this and, because there are so many different cults, especially with the internet these days, they realize like, wow, I've been being pulled into this. How do you have any tips on how to kind of break free from that programming and break free from it, from a high control group?
Well, of course, and inevitably, I'm going to recommend my own book. But I do have the excuse that that's what it was written for.
Yeah.
So opening our minds will show something of, I go through the techniques that are put forward. You have, there's a wonderful book by Bob Cialdini called Influence. And he starts out, it's been a university textbook on psychology course for more than 40 years now. But he says, look, I'm a patsy. Anybody can sell me anything. So I've spent my life studying how this works. And he gives, in that book, 6 techniques of influence. And in a book called Persuasion that he wrote afterwards, another technique. The easy way to get to those is to buy my book, because they're all in there. And understanding how persuasion is done, understanding that you've been subjected to this. And we live in a world now where this is really common. That so, for example, I had getting liking. This is the simple one that love bombing leads to is an affinity for somebody. So anybody who comes to your door who's collecting for charity, they've been trained. They don't just send them out there and say beg some money. They say do this. So I had this woman a couple of years ago at my door, and she'd asked me about my kids. It's like, let's get friendly here. And I say, yeah, I've got 4 kids. And I like most of them. And no, I like all of them. It's not true. I love them and my grandchildren too. And she did this thing which really spun me. She said, "Are they all angels like you?" And I'm kind of, I don't have any money to give you, but it's been an interesting experience. And sales, kids are now being trained in how, they're not being trained in how to communicate decently, how to create attachment and relationship with people. They're being trained in how you say this stuff. And the problem with that, as with Scientology, when I came away from Scientology, I realized that everything I did was false. I was in a tone level. I was making locked on eye contact with people, which is a hell of a way of, in the army and the police, they're taught to use locked on eye contact to control people. Of course they are. It's what,
wow.
You look at it in nature, the way that, I think it's called Palliser's cat. I saw this video with David Attenborough's Asia, this brilliant recent series. And this cat goes and finds this kind of rodent that it eats, and it will just sit there and look at it. And then it waves its tail. And the rodents just can't move. And the cat goes and grabs it. There's something natural in us that responds in some way to this. Also, it's good to see the 8 deadly sins of thought reform, which were catalogued by Robert J. Lifton when he studied 25 victims of the Chinese brainwashing program. And Lifton is one of the greats, in this generation. He is just an incredible man. I've only ever been in touch with him by email, but the books he's produced over the years. And he at first was saying, no, there are these 8 things that people do. So people asking you to confess, or people getting you to confess, that's essential to the process. You know, we'll get all your secrets and we'll write them all down carefully. Then you've got nothing to worry about. We won't tell anyone what you've just told us about your sex life. Don't worry.
Unless you try to leave.
Well, you know, you won't be one of us, you know, as Hubbard put it, you know, we'll never do any harm as long as you're one of us, definitely. So he found 8 things that are incredibly relevant to how people are, you know, brought into compliance with a set of ideas. We can, you know, maybe the next time we meet, we can go through the 7 techniques of Cialdini, the 8 techniques of Lifton, and see how far we get. But understanding these things, you see them. I looked after my mum during the last 5 years of her life, which was great. She was wonderful. She was 94 when she died. And she did 8 years in Scientology as well. And she got to the point where she's a bit creaky. 4 of her vertebrae collapsed. And that was a bit, you know, painful. And so we had to get her an adjustable bed. And this salesman came round and he spent 20 minutes doing his pitch. And then my mum looked at him and she was a bit impish. You know, she knew what I was up to. And she said, "Oh, you need to tell my son. It won't be me that makes the decision." And this guy did exactly this. I just sat through the pitch and he did exactly the same pitch. By the time I was done with him, he was in tears. Because I explained to him what he was doing. And I also said, you know, this bed costs twice as much as the equivalent from IKEA. Why is that? I'll tell you why it is. It's because you've got a huge commission on it. And he was like, "Oh." And he said, I go and see people after I've sold them a bed. I'm a Christian. And it's like, yeah, I don't really think so. And I was, you know, and then I asked him, whose techniques do you use? And he admitted it. He said he used Napoleon Hill. I'm kind of, oh no, that's 1950s stuff. You want the more recent stuff than that. But anybody who's selling and it's, you know, anybody who's in telesales, telemarketing, they're all being given scripts. They're all there's a great movie called what's it called? Sorry to Bother You. You seen that? Where
I have not.
It's got a very scary moment in it. I'll warn you of that. But it's about a salesman being taught the pitch, and beautifully made, beautifully. Yeah, Sorry to Bother You. Dig that out. And our society, so that very thing of faux friendliness, pretending that you like people, I come to the point in a conversation with somebody that I don't know where I say, what exactly is it that you want to sell me? That often works quite well, you know.
Yeah. So finding that whole, like, knowing that, and that's why I love about talking about this topic, is I feel my hope is always that it helps to open people's eyes of like, okay, this is what you keep an eye out for if you're feeling this way, you know, the manipulation, all of those things. We had some great questions and comments too. I just wanted to pull up. Mock says, cults are specialized to use your arrogance against you.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah, absolutely. That it is, you know, the pride that we have in ourselves, the conceit that we feel about ourselves that will be turned on us. Yeah. And if you're unlucky and you do Scientology, you'll turn into Ron Hubbard eventually, which is as conceited as you can be. In 50,000 years, there's never been any other technology than mine. So, yeah,
we are the only one. I'm the only one that figured this out. Magnus says, opening our minds is now on my list of upcoming books.
Thank you so much. Enjoy.
XJW Vernon, is Scientology tax exempt in Britain?
It most certainly is not, and it's got nothing to do with me.
Question, John, did your wife get you into Scientology?
No, I got my first wife into Scientology. I admit it. And we were together for 19 years and had 2 children together. But we had children after we left. So we were in the first 9 years of our relationship, we were in Scientology. And then we had 10 years afterwards and it's kind of weird because as soon as we left, she was like, she didn't want to be in the room. She didn't want to hear anything about Scientology. She was done with it. And that's a real problem, that denial isn't actually going to deal with this.
Yeah, that's true.
To this day, I mean, we've been separated for 30 years, but to this day, as far as I know, she still believes in all sorts of ideas that come from Scientology. What people tend to do is they'll rename the belief. So we don't
Mm.
believe in past lives anymore. We believe in reincarnation. We don't believe in the overt motivator sequence. We believe in karma, or if you want to get technical about it, karma vipaka. And what goes around comes around. They
Mhm.
It's important, if you want to believe any of the ideas of Scientology, it's fine. Think them through. And with any cult, one of the terrible mistakes people make is they leave and they think they're now out of it. And as Leah Remini said in Troublemaker, you can get the girl out of Scientology, but you can't get Scientology out of the girl. Now, I wrote to her as soon as I'd read that and said, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Please be in touch with me. And I got a lovely letter back from her, but she was not going to take up my offer to, free of charge, get the Scientology out of her, which is sad because it's usually only takes a day. And I've
What do
met
you
people.
think what do you think the key ways of doing that? Because you think about how like, how would you do that in a day? Because there's things we don't think about until it happens. Something new happens or happens for the first time, and now how do I deal with this? My Scientology programming said this,
Mm.
but how do you do that in one day?
Well, it can be done face to face in one day, and I've
Okay.
done it many times. And nobody that I've talked with in the last 35 years or something has ever gone back to Scientology.
Yeah.
They've not continued in the independence. Um, Nobody, as far as I know, has come to any harm afterwards. They've not
Mhm.
joined another cult, which is cult hopping is quite typical after people leave. And
I've heard of that.
it's about a process. But what I said about my friend in Australia, that she brought to me the thing that concerned her, and that's where you start.
Mm,
And people will very rapidly realize that there are certain red flags that they've downgraded in importance. Why do they
yeah.
wear sailor suits? They aren't sailor suits, they're Coast Guard uniforms. Get this right.
Mhm.
Why does it cost so much money? Because Ron Hubbard had expensive habits. There are reasons for everything, but it is it's it's that which has made the person feel that this is true.
Mhm.
It's that they've granted authority to Hubbard, and so it's different for different people. So one on one, there's a way of doing it. I am at the moment. I've floated a course to the Aftermath Foundation because I was involved for about. I was on the board for about 6 months last year, and it's great that the SPTV Foundation, Aftermath Foundation, are seeking to help people escape from Scientology. But as yet, it's physical escape, and that
Yeah,
is the
exactly.
first stage. You can't,
Mhm.
without that. I
Yeah,
am
or
really
with, helping them with therapy or things like that, but this
well,
sounds fascinating. I mean, for there to be a course on it where people could actually do it and kind of work on their own deprogramming.
yeah, there's a difficulty. There's going from leaving to therapy, unless the therapist really understands Scientology.
Yeah.
That there's this problem that it's a little complicated. Steve Hassan puts it that you have um, the pre-cult identity and the cult identity. So you've got these two things going on. That's an It's an easy way of starting, but what's actually happening is way more complicated. Again, in Opening Our Minds, I talk about this, and there's a kind of XY axis. There we are. There's a little illustration that the X axis is how you feel, and the Y axis is who you're with. So if you're talking to your dog and you're angry, then that's your identity at that time. If you're talking to your boss and you're sad, then that's your identity. The two things will, there's an identity that comes from that. The problem with Scientology is, for example, if you've been in Scientology, especially if you grew up in Scientology, there is a
Mhm.
compulsion to be enthusiastic. It's what you're
Mhm.
meant to be. You're meant to be tone 4 all the time.
240,
And
yeah.
tone 4 enthusiasm. We'll,
Mhm.
we'll we'll come down from the shouting at people, which is serenity in Scientology. Very weird that. Never
I know,
quite
I always
understood
thought
that.
so.
Yeah, but you're meant to present in a certain way. Whereas if you're born in a Calvinist group, you're meant to look miserable all the time. You know, so they're expectations that are an identity that belongs to the cult. I talk about the cultic shell in my work. So if a therapist comes to you and they're using their method, and I am familiar with many, many methods of counseling, some of them I think are intensely dangerous, like Freudian, Jungian, Adlerian, Reichian. I think they're really dangerous. I'm very suspicious of the work of Fritz Perls, though there are later Gestalt therapists who, I have a friend who's a Gestalt therapist who does a reasonable job. Cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive therapy, trauma-based cognitive, mindfulness-based. There are all sorts of ways of approaching this, and therapists tend to apply their model to the person rather than understanding what the person needs, first of all.
Yeah.
And if you haven't penetrated the cultic shell, you're actually giving therapy to the cult identity.
Cult personality. Oh my God. That makes so much freaking sense. That is why a lot of times in leaving a cult, because we talk about this a lot, like you physically leave, but you're still doing the things that we were indoctrinated to do.
Yeah.
And I've never quite understood how sometimes people will go through different, whether it's therapy or different things, but still not seem to change those things.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap, you're right. So a regular therapist just wouldn't necessarily know that you have to figure out what the person's true identity is.
Yeah.
You have to get through to the person, not the cult personality.
And let me say that usually, I've dealt with about 600 people over the years face to face. It's not something I really do anymore because it's emotionally quite something. You have to, the way I do it, you have to kind of surrender yourself completely to this person and let them, find what they need, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
So I don't do much of it anymore. But and of course, with any therapist, you have a supervisor normally, so that you can offload some of the trauma that you've been given. And because I never charged money to do it, it left me poor and upset, really. In one way. No, I got the nice letters from people, so that's all good. But the problem is that if the therapist doesn't understand the system, they can actually make it worse. Because they're trying they're trying to get you to comply with their way of looking at it. So, for example, existential therapy, which you don't hear about very much anymore, but in the 50s, Rollo May, who wrote a brilliant critique of Ron Hubbard, his existential therapy worked like this. You're having a problem with your model of the world. I'm happy in my model of the world, so I'm going to inflict my model of the world on you.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you want the person to actually, often, if I, back in the early 90s when I did interventions, somebody at the end of it would be going, well, what do you believe, John? And it's like, no, the answer is, you don't want to believe what I believe. What I believe is nuts. Forget that.
Yeah.
Look at me. Look at where it's got me. You want to work out what you want to believe. So I had people who would then, they'd get religion. They'd become Christians or what have you. I didn't have anybody that joined a cult, though. And which is important. So if I'm dealing with somebody, I don't want to persuade them to think the way I think, because nobody wants to do that, believe me.
Yeah. And that's part of the problem. And in having these conversations and in online communities, whether it's this one or I've seen it all over the place on the internet, it's been the biggest eye-opening thing to me being on YouTube the last year and being in multitude of different communities and seeing that why is it the default seems to be I'm upset with you unless you think and believe exactly as I do. And for you to heal and be better, you need to think and believe as I do. And you need to perceive things in the way that I do. And I'm walking around going, that just doesn't work. Why can't we all have our own beliefs? Why is there a need to enforce them under other people or try to control what they're doing, especially when we came from a place of a cult, in my case, it was Scientology, where that was so enforced. But it's making a lot of sense now what you're saying about even if they're in therapy, an individual who has left a cult or a high control group, if they haven't gotten to who they are, the therapist could still be addressing the cult personality.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the rules, the tram lines are still there. The rules of the cult are still functioning. So getting somebody to not need that,
Yeah.
and then set up, I mean, for me, leaving Scientology was just the most incredible liberation. The year after I left was just, I mean, it was nice that I felt I was helping people. It wasn't so nice that I didn't have any time for myself, certainly 2 years after I left. But that first year, I was high on, hey, I can decide what I think. I can decide how I feel. I don't have to pretend feeling something. You know, I don't have to sit with an e-meter and electrodes and do
Mhm.
anything.
And I
And
can talk to who I want to talk to, and I can have relationships with people I want to have relationships, and I can not have relationships. I can have boundaries with different people, and I'm allowed to have different boundaries. I don't owe you all of the access to me versus, say, this person over here. It's just so fascinating to me how so many, it's almost human nature to be culty and try to control.
and there we come to the nub of the problem. When Margaret Singer was working on Cults in Our Midst, which is a masterpiece, she wrote with Janja Lelic. I met her at that time in 1993, and I think she says in the book, but she said it's called Cults in Our Midst because we live in a set of interlocking cults. That's how the
Yeah.
world is. Political groups, religious groups, social groups. Our tribalism is overwhelming. And of course, looking out from our perspective, other people are weird, other groups are weird. You know, my mum, she grew up in Nottingham, and then she, my dad changed jobs, and then they had to move away. So I was born 40 miles away in Lichfield. Now, if you go 10 miles, or it used to be, if you go 10 miles in England, you have a different dialect.
Mhm.
So in Birmingham, near where I grew up, people talk like they talk in Peaky Blinders. And she hated, you know, which I can understand, she hated the local accent. And her opinion was that in Nottingham, they don't have an accent. And this exemplifies this thing. Now, she moved back here in the 1980s and went, oh,
Mhm.
laters, that she, because it was to her the normal way of speaking, and we all do that. Of course we do, that there are words that you shouldn't use in one culture that are normal in another culture.
Mhm.
Um, there are gestures, you know, you don't show your bare feet to anybody if you're in Thailand. I'd said they're happy people, but don't show them the soles of your feet. They don't like that. You don't wave your shoe at people if you're in an Arab country. And there are certain hand gestures that you can make in one country or
Mhm.
another country that mean different things. This one, which is now taken to be very rude here, actually means I've still got my fingers. And it
Mm.
derives from the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, because when the French caught English longbowmen, they would cut these two fingers off. And so
Wow.
when the English archers faced the French, they went like this. And it has now come to mean something quite different. But so gestures, whether you're in some cultures, you don't look at people. It's considered rude to look somebody in the eyes.
Mhm.
In some cultures, women are meant to be completely covered, which is
Mhm.
a very strange idea as far as I'm concerned. But I do understand it because, you know, that they might be less likely to be attacked if people
Mhm.
don't know what they look like. I can see that angle of it. But everything is culture, everything is tribal, everything is my group, my family, my people, or Ordo Amoris, as J.D. Vance so idiotically said the other week, that, you know, I love my kids. And it really reminded me of Hubbard's 8 Dynamics, where he's saying, you know, you love yourself, your kids, then
Mhm.
your surrounding people and what have you. And it is true that is a pagan belief, as the Pope has most recently pointed out to him. It's not a Christian belief. You're meant to love everybody, according to that. Thankfully, I'm not a Christian, so I don't. I, I, and for me, that was a very big thing.
That's what I think about. I think about, like, how do we evolve beyond this, where we don't need the tribalism, where we can just allow people to live their lives in the way that they choose, right? And in different areas, it's different. But even just here, starting in the US, if somebody has, just however they want to live their life, if it's not, of course, hurting someone, but get rid of that need of, I must get you to conform to this, like not needing a cult. I've thought about that a lot, like in not needing, like what you were saying about how people are love bomb, and then the cult, whether it's Scientology or another one, will find out what their pain points are, and we'll push those buttons, and we'll try and get them to see that only this organization, group, whatever, can handle that. And it's all the closest I've come in just thinking about this myself is that if we can create our own happiness for ourselves, if we can soothe ourselves, if we can just have that internal knowing that my happiness is fully dependent upon me and how I see things and where I want to spend my time and how I want to live my life, then I don't have the desire or need to change anybody else to fit even my narrative, because I can create my happiness wherever I am. And it's still, there just seems to be such pushback in the world to, well, we identify each other by, well, what group do you belong to? Who you are, your family. And I get that. That makes sense. But it creates such separation. It's us versus them. It's like you're saying, it's in Christianity, the idea is you love everybody. And which is a concept I think is really beautiful, because to me, that means more a willingness to accept people for who they are and for where they are. How do we stop? And that might be just a very complicated question too, of how do we move beyond it? Because it just seems like we're doomed for continued cults and tribalism and us versus them, this cult mentality that I thought all this time was limited to Scientology. Then I went, oh, there's other cults where they're doing the same thing. Okay, so cults do this. And then I've met or I've interacted with so many people never in a cult, supposedly. And I'm like, wait a minute, they're doing it. They're trying to tell me who I can speak to, who I shouldn't speak to. I'm like, how is that allowed? You weren't even in a cult and you're trying to do that. And now I'm trying to wrap my head around it and go, is this some degree of just that it's human nature? Does what I do somehow threaten their beliefs if it's different? I don't know. What do you think, John?
It is a wonderfully complicated question. I think the book is called The Dawn of Everything, by David Graeber, Graeber, and David Wengrow. And one of them, Graeber was an anthropologist, and Wengrow, who is still with us, Graeber passed. Wengrow is an archaeologist, and they spent 10 years writing a book rewriting the history and prehistory of human civilizations from a scientific point of view. And they disagree with almost everything that you're taught in school about human civilization. So there's this idea of progress, this idea of that there will be a perfect type of society. And they say, no. And looking back, they find certain things out. There's this presumption that there'll always be warfare, there'll always be aggression. Certainly, as I was growing up, there was the thought that we're chimpanzees, which there is some interest in that, and then in the 90s, we found out that we're less than 2% different from chimpanzees and bonobos. And
what's a bonobo?
A bonobo, they used to be called pygmy chimps, because they're they're on average 1 inch shorter than chimps. So I think that's a bit, it's a bit harsh. You probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference looking at them, but they are different species. And chimps notoriously are quite aggressive. They have alpha males. Only the alpha male is allowed to have sex with the females. though females will skulk off into the bushes, I'm afraid. Dear. And have it away with one of the younger males. But there'll be a dominant male. And there was a lot of thought in the 1920s and 30s. There was a Nazi scientist called Konrad Lorenz, who brought forward this idea that aggression is the driving force of humanity. And did I mention he was a Nazi? Then it was realized that bonobos were this different species, and they are not aggressive in the same way at all. They, in fact, everything is sexual to bonobos. So the chimps want to kill it, and the bonobos want to do something else to it. And then it was discovered that we are really close genetically to both of these. And so the idea came forward that we're the third chimpanzee, third type of chimpanzee, which genetically has some usefulness to it. But there's a problem which was not really understood until probably about 25 years ago. So you had this idea of natural selection, that the random mutation that creates something. Then you have what's called sexual selection, which isn't what it sounds like, where there'll be certain characteristics that are considered attractive. So, for example, one of the experiments was done, they took a bird of paradise, and this creature would normally, this particular type of bird of paradise, normally has an 18-inch tail. And so they chopped one of the tails in half and stuck it on another one. So it now had a 27-inch tail. And they monitored the one with the half tail, the 9-inch, the one with the 18-inch tail, and the one with the 27-inch tail. And the one with the 27-inch tail really got lucky. And the one with the 9-inch tail got nothing. This is sexual selection, where there's choice for a certain thing. And it explains speciation in human beings to a large extent, that we have tended to favor certain characteristics in our tribal groups. And so skin color, though it is related to climate and things, there's been a selection for certain shapes. If you look, for example, historically at examples of female beauty, this is an amazing one, that how much, if you look at the flappers of the 1920s, skinny women with no breasts, this is the ideal of this time. Then you look to before the First World War, and you've got the Edwardian hourglass figure, big up top, big down bottom, tiny little waist. Then you go back to, say, Rubens, and you've got women who are Rubenesque. That's the word we use for it. You have large thighs, large bellies, and generally small breasts. Then you go back to, say, Jan van Eyck, the first of the great Renaissance painters in the 1400s, and you've got very high foreheads, very, women would even shave a part out, so very high forehead. This is very attractive apparently to these people. Small breasts, great big bellies. So you look at the Arnolfini wedding, for example, or his picture of Eve, Jan van Eyck, huge bellies. They're not pregnant. This was considered. So you're going, so our idea of what is attractive is changing. This is fascinating. I don't think the fashion industry are really helping us very much with this one. And you've then got two other aspects of evolution. One is epigenetics, which is that you can actually, something can change in a single generation and be passed on. And this has been absolutely proven now. It started with studies of the Swedish famine, beginning of the 20th century. And it was shown that their babies would be born with smaller pelvises when they grew up. So in one generation, pelvic size had changed. Richard Dawkins didn't like this, with his selfish genes and all of that. Now you've got this other aspect called cultural transmission, the fourth aspect or dimension of evolution, where we pass on language, for example. Language is not something we're born with, but it's evolved with us. And you've got all of this complexity, which actually separates us and says, well, yeah, chimps behave this way, bonobos behave this way. We can change our minds. We have language. We have thought.
Yeah.
We have complete adaptability in a single generation. And as human beings, we have complete adaptability in a single day. You can change your mind. You can decide you don't like avocados anymore or what have you. And things go on. And because we have this, we also have this capacity that we to change our minds about what's going on. I'm going to spend hours talking about this at some point. I'm fascinated by the evolution of religion. I've spent a lifetime studying the evolution of religion, how religions have changed. So if you talk to a Christian now and you look at Christian texts from, let's say, the Book of Revelation, I'll make this quick.
Mhm.
Book of Revelation was written in the 90s of the Christian era. It was written by John of Patmos on the island of, I think he was on Cyprus. And it says in it what it's about. It absolutely says in it that it's about the year 64 AD, when Nero butchered a lot of Christians. He crucified a load of Christians and set fire to them. That's what it's about. It's a criticism of that. And it accidentally got into the New Testament because they thought it was written by John the Apostle. It wasn't. It was just written by some bloke called John, who sounds like he, excuse me, took a lot of mushrooms or something. Beast with 7 heads and 7 eyes and all of this stuff. All those sevens are about Rome and about Nero. And the number 666 is also about Nero. It's in the book itself. Then in 1178, a man called Joachim Fiore comes along and says, it's a prophecy. That book has influenced every generation since. This is why Waco happened. This is what Charles Manson believed in. This is what L. Ron Hubbard believed in. He tried to summon
the
Armageddon.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Well, you froze, John. Oh, there you are. Now you're back. Now you're back.
I'm unfrozen.
That is fascinating, and we're gonna have to pick this up again because I got to go to another meeting. But fascinating. So when we wrap this up, let's set another date.
Let's do it.
Now we've got multiple more things to talk about. So keep an eye. We will schedule something again because I've got a million more questions. I get questions answered, and then there comes to be so much more. But I want to remind people, you can go over here to Jon Atack Family and Friends, and you can follow him on YouTube. You can also go to his website, which is what, John?
jonatack.co.uk, and my arts website is .com. So I have 2 websites.
Oh, okay, cool. Perfect. Well, we have to wrap it up because I got to go to another meeting. But oh my gosh, as per usual, we could talk for hours. Everybody who's here, if you could do me a solid, hit that like button, hit that subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thank you so much, John. We are going to talk again soon.
Great. Always a pleasure, Natalie. Great fun.
Yep. And everybody else, get out there and have a fun cult-free day.
Do it. And do subscribe to my channel also, please.
Exactly. Jon Atack. We shared it there. I'll see you guys later. Oh, and remember, 6 p.m. 6 p.m. tonight, I'm doing a premiere of a video, a pre-recorded video. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody.